Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Light in the Darkness, where we boldly go where no man has gone before. And today we are going to be talking about something completely different, namely...
Ignorance versus ignoring. Sorry, it's actually boldly go where no one has gone before. They changed it in Star Trek Next Generation, but that's fine. You're not a Trekkie, so you wouldn't know that.
I do not know that, but
They
that is
changed
very
it.
gender neutral.
Changed it, yeah, to make it
like
more inclusive. But we're not here to talk about Star Trek today.
Much to your disappointment.
Much to my disappointment. One day. Today we're here to talk about ignoring versus ignorance. So this is a word play that I came across. I was teaching Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale in one of my classes this winter. I've read it several times before because I've taught it several times before, but I don't know if you find this, Stephen, if you reread things, certain things will jump out at you.
Yeah,
certain
absolutely.
Reading. And there was it's just a couple sentences that really jumped out at me back in February, and it's just been stuck in my head, and maybe it was a warning for the pandemic and what was about to come that Atwood was warning us. So I'm just going to read a very brief section from the novel of where this comes up from, and then we're going to talk about it. So just to give you a little bit of background, what is happening is the protagonist, Offred, is telling us, the reader, about how their society has slipped into this dystopia. So how did you go from living in our society to now women basically being like sex slaves? Okay, so she says, is that how we lived then? But we lived as usual. Everyone does, most of the time. Whatever is going on is as usual. Even this is usual now. We lived as usual by ignoring. Ignoring isn't the same as ignorance. You have to work at it. That's my favorite part. Ignoring is not the same as ignorance because you have to work at it. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today, is this difference between ignorance and ignoring. Should we start with ignorance? Let's define what we mean by ignorance. Let me go over to you. How would you define, what does it mean to be ignorant?
I think you're ignorant when you are not well informed, or sometimes informed, about a certain topic.
Do you think sometimes you're ignorant if you are informed about a certain
if you are not.
If you are not informed.
Yeah, if you are not informed about something, if you do not know what calculus is, then you are ignorant, I think, of calculus.
Yeah.
For example.
And I think sometimes where we then throw the word ignorance around is when some people then speak on certain topics as if they do have the knowledge, but they don't. So we then use that kind of, well, they're just being ignorant of, they don't have the knowledge behind them of what they're talking about. So Atwood here then says that they weren't acting in ignorance, they were ignoring something. And that ignoring is not the same as ignorance because you have to work at it. What does that mean to you, Stephen?
To me,
ignoring. Yeah, what does that mean to you?
Well, I actually think that's a really good dichotomy, because I do think that when you choose, no, let me rephrase it. When you ignore something, that is a much more active process, because then you actually may be informed, potentially even fairly well informed about something, but you choose to ignore a certain evidence or a certain phenomena or certain theories or whatever it is that you're thinking or talking about. And that is a more active process, right? Now you have the knowledge, but you choose to pretend that it doesn't exist, for example.
I love that. Yeah, that it's more active. I actually have that written down, active. And I also had deliberate. It's more deliberate, right? You are making a deliberate choice that you do have the knowledge, but you are actively and deliberately choosing to not take that knowledge into account when it comes to either your thinking process or even actions that you have. So I really like that line that she has, that you have to work harder at ignoring something than being ignorant. And I think it is because of that active and deliberate choice that is being made. And even talking about our general theme of critical thinking, I think you are actively and deliberately choosing to not then engage with critical thinking. And I think oftentimes choosing to just fall into your own confirmation bias, right? That I just want to stay here and ignore what my critical thinking would normally alert me to in these circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that can actually become, I actually think that unlike ignorance, which can be remedied by learning more or teaching someone something, actually ignoring something can become a much more insidious process, because then you are choosing, in light of certain evidence, for example, to just disregard that, discard it, just to, because I just cannot believe it, or I refuse to believe that that is the case, even though time and time again it's been shown. And that I think is much more dangerous.
Yes. And I think sometimes with ignorance, I do sometimes think that ignorance could also be a choice, that you were choosing to not educate yourself. But I would say on the whole, maybe my optimism coming out, usually people aren't actively choosing to be ignorant. It's just that they don't know what they don't know yet. It hasn't fully been exposed. Yes, but ignoring, again, you're making that active and deliberate choice. Do you have any examples you would like to bring up?
Well, there is the famous example, which to some people remains very controversial, but the scientist who found that vaccines lead to autism, and it has been shown that he had embellished, if not made up, that data. This has been shown. It has been exposed. It's been clear. He himself, if I remember correctly, actually admitted it at some point, and yet people still refuse to see that aspect. They only see the aspect of, no, vaccines cause autism, full stop. But it's not. It's like that research is now to be disregarded because it was not proper research. But even when people are told that, you still see that people say, no, but it still causes that. But what evidence do you have then? Like, and I mean, anecdotes don't count, right?
No.
Like it has to be properly scientifically established evidence. That's just missing. So in my mind, that would be ignoring a very important facet of that research. Or that
the
scenario.
facet where it was disproven.
Yeah, that's because how important is that? I mean, and people just don't see it. Again, even when told, even some scientists, even people with medical training, when told that the dude himself said, you know what, I made that up. What remains? How can you then say no? But I still think he was right. But he said he made it up. Like, this just, it aggravates me.
Yes, then you are choosing to ignore. What example I had was from the documentary Behind the Curve, which I actually don't know if it's still on Netflix, but it was on Netflix. It's a documentary about flat earthers, and it is a wonderful documentary, and it put me in my place as well of some of the judgmental thoughts I came in with, but that's not what I want to talk about right now. There was
judgmental?
I can be very judgmental. There was two. Those count. Not anymore. I learned from Behind the Curve to look at the person and to maybe have some compassion. Anyway,
maybe.
So some of the people within this documentary who were flat earthers, there's two different experiments that two different groups of people ran within the documentary that were intended to prove that the earth was flat. And both of these experiments, probably not shockingly so, actually just showed that the earth was in fact round and it is in fact rotating. in the face of this new data, it was two different sets of people. Two sets of people chose to ignore that data that disproved their theory, and then would come up with reasons for why maybe they didn't conduct the experiment correctly. So we'll just have to retry it at another time. So in that case, you are ignoring data simply because it doesn't suit what you were trying to prove. And at that point, you really are, you can't claim ignorance at that point, that you don't fully understand why the earth might be round or whatever. At that point, you have, from your own experiment, proof that it is indeed not flat, and you are choosing to ignore that. And in that case, it took a lot of work, because the one experiment I was just rereading about cost something like $20,000 to get this gyro laser to try to disprove. And it didn't work. So I would say that's ignoring something.
Yeah, because then you start to, I'm trying to recover the quote from memory now. This is, of course, a fictional quote because it's from Sherlock Holmes, but I always thought it was a good one. He said, it's a capital mistake to reason before you have data, because invariably you start to twist data to suit facts as opposed to twist facts to suit data or something. Like it's a matter of you start to, which by the way is not entirely how science works, because you also have to have a theory before you acquire data. But anyway, the basic idea is that, of course, you should adjust your theory to suit the data, as opposed to just twisting data to make it suit what you want to be true. That's unfair and doesn't make sense, really.
Yeah.
But that's often what happens. So I think that's a very good example.
Yeah. And again, driven by that confirmation bias, right? You were just looking for evidence, data, anecdotes that support what you already believe, and then disregard or do not even take into account anything that disproves what you believe in. So you are then actively choosing and deliberately choosing to ignore that counter evidence. I don't know. Do you have any other examples or anything else you'd like to add?
No, flat Earth is a fertile feeding ground for this kind of stuff, though. GMM over R squared. The R squared is... Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's a good documentary. I would recommend everyone watch it.
Yeah, I'll check it out. That sounds really good. Yeah, no, I think you can come up with a lot of examples of these kind of scenarios where people firmly believe something. Like we've kind of, in my mind, this kind of ties into the probability and possibility a bit as well. If you firmly believe in UFOs and aliens visiting the Earth, for example, then it becomes rather easy for some people to just come up with the most ludicrous explanation of certain phenomena, simply because that fits the pattern of this must be a UFO, this must be some sort of civilization visiting us.
Yes.
As opposed to looking to the data that's actually out there, right?
Yeah. Or me choosing, if the duckling's parents had all of a sudden come out of the reeds, me just choosing to ignore that and be like, nope, those obviously aren't the parents.
Must be different ducks, because the duck-related gang violence killed the parents. Yeah. If you have no idea what we're talking about, you have to watch the previous episode of this. But yes.
Maybe one thing to kind of go back to wrap up is this. I'm also really interested in this idea as living as usual, and whatever we are currently living is the usual. And that's when we choose to then actively ignore certain things going on around us because we have normalized what is happening. So a lot of examples or a lot of parallels have been made between the society in Handmaid's Tale to Nazi Germany, right? That you have this small incremental changes that happen slowly, not suddenly, so that these slow changes become normalized and you see it as being normal, that your neighbor, their business was shut down because they're Jewish. And you're thinking like, well, that's the new law. And then, it slowly gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
to make it seem normal. And in that happening, this can often then lead us to ignoring certain things happening within our society, within our communities, because it has become normalized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. I think that's yeah, and you accept it because when things do happen in very small increments, then things become normal, and think of all kinds of very unpleasant situations. Think of abusive relationships that happen in very small increments, and people then struggle tremendously to get out of that. And it's very easy for outsiders to say, "Oh, but why not? Why would you stay in that? It's so easy to get out." But if it becomes your normal, it's not that easy. And people habitually underestimate that, I think.
Yeah. So I think that's a key, and a key as well, to really like tune into our critical thinking in our individual lives and our lives as citizens within communities and societies, to also be questioning certain things just because they feel normal, and just accepting them and ignoring maybe a gut feeling in your stomach that maybe something isn't right just because, well, this is the usual, so I'll just keep kind of trucking along.
Yeah, and finding the courage to also speak up against that, because that's not easy either.
No.
And we know that there are many social psychological experiments to suggest that it's very difficult for people to go against the established norm. So it's very hard, but I think if you don't do that, if you're unable to do those kinds of things, then we're up for grabs.
Yeah,
and that's a problem.
And it's these small things, that these are human rights that I think we take for granted today. That, you know, I wouldn't be allowed to vote right now if there wasn't changes and people ignoring, well, this is the way it's always been, so we're going to keep going this way, right? That we need to make those changes and not just ignore something because it feels normal, I guess. It's been normalized. Yeah.
I feel I'm not allowed to vote in this country. I feel marginalized. But, you know, no, it's a different matter. Yeah, I know, but that's true. Yeah, it's probably for the best too. But anyway, no, I understand. It's these kinds of changes that you can only obtain those kinds of changes through people speaking up and being willing to make a change.
Yeah. And it can be dangerous, and it can be very hard. I think we're seeing around our world right now how dangerous it can be.
Absolutely.
To try to make these systemic changes, right?
Yes.
But I think the opposite side of it is then you have to ignore, right? Because I think in a lot of what's going on in our world right now, we can no longer claim ignorance. I think we have certain information at our fingertips. It's being presented to us quite freely, that we can't claim ignorance anymore.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to just make that end where we started. That was bonus points for your teaching skills here. This was a roundup that was just disturbingly good. Yeah. Nice.
See how deep you can go into just like
three
sentences? How dare you? We are talking about Margaret Atwood.
I know. That was I could just stop myself.
It's very offensive, but that was a good one. Yeah, I walked right in.
It was too obvious, Anna.
Too obvious. Yep. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry too. I'm sorry. I'll repent. Anyway, what do we have scheduled for next time?
Well, I think for next time we're going to talk about Descartes and talk about experiential learning. That's
fantastic person. Descartes was such a magnificent person with all kinds of weird quirks that I just love. So
yeah, and
and his method was not bad too, by the way. But yeah, we should talk about that.
Yeah, my countrywoman maybe killed him, which maybe we can also talk about.
We should talk about that. Pneumonia and
yeah. So maybe we'll just talk about Descartes.
It would just be like 20 minutes Descartes and then 5 minutes Descartes' method.
Yeah. So we'll see.
I like it. Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much once again,
Thank
everyone,
you.
for watching. Thank you, Anna, for being here. I appreciate it. We hope this was useful. Let us know what you think. Of course, if there are any other topics that you would like us to talk about in the broad context of critical thinking, then let us know as well. We shall
Absolutely.
listen. And that's
Yeah,
pretty much it, isn't it?
that's it.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.